The moment my mother looked across the dinner table and said, "You're not my real daughter anyway," my entire world stopped making sense. Why would she say something so cruel over alone? Why did my father look terrified instead of angry? And why did he desperately shove an old envelope labeled birth records under a stack of papers the second our eyes met? I came to dinner expecting another lecture about helping my older brother's failing business. I left wondering if the biggest lie in my life had nothing to do with money at all. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. If stories about family secrets, hard-earned justice, and finding the truth speak to you, consider subscribing so you won't miss the rest of Freya's journey. Monday morning should have felt ordinary. Instead, every number on my computer screen blurred together because I kept hearing the same sentence over and over. "You're not my real daughter anyway." I had spent 10 years building a career where facts mattered more than emotions. As a CPA with a regional accounting firm in Columbus, I reviewed financial statements every day, looking for inconsistencies most people overlooked. Clients trusted me because I didn't jump to conclusions. I followed evidence. That habit probably kept me from driving straight back to my parents' house Sunday night and demanding answers. Evidence first. Questions second. Emotions last. It wasn't easy. I stared at a client's balance sheet for almost 15 minutes before realizing I had been reading the same paragraph repeatedly. My coworker leaned into my office. "You okay, Freya?" I forced a smile. "Didn't sleep much?" She nodded sympathetically before walking away. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. How could I even repeating the words aloud made them sound impossible? My mother had raised me from infancy. She packed my lunches. She sat through piano recitals. She celebrated my CPA license. How could she suddenly tell me I wasn't her real daughter? Either she'd lied for 33 years, or she'd said the cruelest thing imaginable simply to hurt me. Neither explanation made sense. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed. Mom. I watched it ring until voicemail picked up. 2 minutes later, Dad. I ignored that one too. Then another call. This time it was my brother Mason. I almost laughed. The timing wasn't subtle. When I still didn't answer, a text appeared. "Call us. Mom didn't mean it." Another message followed before I could lock the screen. "She's under a lot of stress. Please don't make this worse." I stared at those words. Don't make this worse, not, "We're sorry," not, "Let us explain," not even, "She was wrong." Just another request for me to protect everyone else's comfort. It felt painfully familiar. Growing up, I had always been the reasonable one. When Mason forgot homework, I shared mine. When he totaled Dad's truck at 19, everyone insisted he was just immature. When he dropped out of college after 2 semesters, my parents refinanced part of their home to help him start a construction company. When I graduated with honors from Ohio State, I thanked everyone who helped me pay tuition. The truth nobody had. I'd worked evenings at a bookstore, tutored accounting students, taken out federal loans, applied for every scholarship I qualified for. I remembered asking my parents once whether they could help with 1 semester of housing. Dad had sighed. "I wish we could." Mom squeezed my shoulder. "Your brother just needs us more right now." Back then I believed them. Families made sacrifices. Needs weren't always equal. Now, those memories felt different. Not because I suddenly believed they'd never loved me, because I was starting to wonder whether I'd spent years explaining away a pattern I didn't want to see. That afternoon, another message appeared. This one from Mom. "Sunday never should have happened. Come over tonight. We'll pretend none of it was said. Pretend." The word irritated me more than the insult itself. Pretending had apparently become the foundation of my family. I didn't respond. Instead, after work, I drove across town to someone I trusted more than almost anyone. Rachel Carter had been my roommate during graduate school before becoming an attorney specializing in probate estate administration and family records. She also possessed an annoying habit of asking uncomfortable questions. Exactly what I needed. She opened the door, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You look terrible." "I feel worse." She waited until we were sitting in her kitchen before speaking again. "So, what happened?" I told her everything: the dinner, the loan request, my refusal, Mom's words, Dad's reaction, the envelope. I even described the faded handwriting across the front. Rachel didn't interrupt once. When I finally finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Let's separate facts from assumptions." I almost smiled. That sounded exactly like something I would say to a client. "Fact 1, she continued. "Your mother said you aren't her real daughter." I nodded. "Fact 2, your father reacted with panic rather than denial." "Yes." "Fact 3, you saw an envelope labeled birth records." "Yes." Rachel folded her arms. "What assumptions are you making?" I hesitated. "That I was adopted." She shook her head. "Possible. Not proven. That they lied my whole life. Also possible. Still not proven." I sighed. "I know." She leaned forward. "Freya, birth records exist for a lot of reasons. Adoptions, delayed registrations, court orders, corrections, replacement certificates. You don't know which one you're dealing with." I appreciated that answer. She wasn't feeding my fears. She was narrowing possibilities. Then she asked something I hadn't considered. "Did the envelope look new?" "No." "Old?" "Very old." "What color?" "Yellow." "Worn." She nodded slowly. "So someone has kept it for decades." That somehow felt more significant than anything else. She walked into her office and returned carrying a legal reference guide. "In Ohio," she explained, "birth certificates can be amended or reissued under specific circumstances." She showed me examples. Different seals, different filing formats, different issue dates. "If you ever get your hands on a copy," she said, "don't just read the names. Read everything. The issue date, the certificate number, the registrar, the filing notes. Those details tell stories. Professional instinct took over. Finally, something concrete, something measurable." That evening, I drove toward my parents' neighborhood. I told myself I wasn't going inside. I simply wanted to think. Instead, I noticed something unexpected. Dad's truck wasn't in the driveway. Mom's SUV was. The garage door stood partially open. Lights glowed inside the kitchen. I sat across the street for nearly 20 minutes. Then Mom backed out of the driveway. She drove away. The house went dark. Only one lamp remained lit near Dad's home office. I waited another 15 minutes. No movement, no cars, nothing. I wasn't proud of what happened next, but I also wasn't ashamed. I still had the emergency house key my parents insisted every family member should keep, just in case. Apparently, I was still family enough for emergencies, just not enough for the truth. The alarm code hadn't changed. Neither had the smell of cedar furniture and lemon polish. Every floorboard creaked exactly where I remembered. I walked toward Dad's office. The filing cabinet stood against the far wall, locked. The desk drawers, also locked. But sitting beside the printer was something else. A stack of photocopies waiting to be shredded. Most were insurance forms, property tax notices, bank statements. Then, halfway down the pile, my breath caught. A photocopy of a birth certificate. The name read Freya Webb. My hands trembled. I wasn't interested in the names anymore. Rachel had been right. I looked at the details: date of birth, county, registrar, certificate number, issue date, and then one line froze me completely. This certificate hadn't been issued the year I was born. It had been reissued nearly 12 years later. No explanation, no court notation, just a replacement certificate generated more than a decade after my birth. I carefully photographed every page with my phone. I put everything back exactly where I'd found it, closed the drawer, straightened the papers, turned off the office light, locked the front door behind me. Only after I reached my car did I allow myself to breathe. I opened the photos again and zoomed in. There it was, the certificate number, the filing code, the state seal. Something about the numbering bothered me. I couldn't explain why. It simply didn't look consistent. I immediately texted Rachel. I found a copy. Sending photos now. She replied less than 3 minutes later. Don't confront your parents. Then another message arrived. Freya, this certificate number doesn't match Ohio's filing format for the year you were born. A third message appeared before I could answer. If I'm right, only the original record can tell you who you really are. The next morning, I was standing outside the Ohio Department of Health before the building officially opened. I had barely slept. Not because I had convinced myself I was adopted, not because I had already decided my parents had lied. I couldn't afford conclusions without evidence. That was exactly how innocent people made terrible decisions. Rachel met me outside carrying a leather portfolio instead of her usual briefcase. You look like you're preparing for trial, I said. In a way we are. She handed me a folder. I printed the statutes you'll need. I looked down. Forms, state procedures, instructions for requesting original birth records, privacy requirements, everything highlighted. She smiled. I know you. You'll read every line before you sign anything. She wasn't wrong. Inside, we took a number and waited. The Vital Records office wasn't dramatic. No hidden archives, no mysterious vaults. Just fluorescent lights, gray chairs, and people handling paperwork that quietly changed lives. A young clerk called my name. Freya Webb. I stepped forward. I'd like to request records relating to my birth. The woman nodded politely. Do you have identification? I handed over my driver's license. She compared the information carefully before typing into her computer. This request may take some time. I understand. There are different categories of records. She paused. Are you requesting a certified replacement certificate, or are you seeking access to original records under applicable eligibility? Rachel stepped beside me. My client is requesting every record she's legally entitled to review. The clerk nodded. We'll need you to complete additional paperwork. While I filled out the forms, Rachel quietly explained each section. This isn't like ordering another birth certificate online, she whispered. Original records are governed differently. They can include amendments, court filings, acknowledgments of paternity delayed registrations, and other supporting documents. I signed every page carefully. No assumptions, no exaggerations, only facts. The clerk collected the packet. We'll review the request. Please have a seat. Waiting was harder than filling out forms. Every minute seemed to stretch. I watched families applying for marriage certificates, parents requesting copies for school enrollment, a young couple laughing over paperwork for their newborn. Life continued around me while mine felt suspended. Rachel finally broke the silence. Whatever happens today, she looked directly at me. Your identity doesn't disappear because a document says something unexpected. I know. Do you? I wanted to answer yes. Instead, I looked away. About 40 minutes later, another employee approached. "Ms. Webb, we've located several historical filings." "Several. Not one. Several." He continued. "Some materials require supervisory approval before release." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual." He chose his words carefully. "It isn't common." That wasn't reassuring. Another 30 minutes passed. By then, I had finished 2 bottles of water without realizing it. Then I saw him. My father, Thomas Webb. Walking quickly through the lobby, his eyes immediately found me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he came straight toward us. Rachel stood before I did. "Mr. Webb." He ignored her. "Freya." His voice sounded exhausted. "You shouldn't be here." I folded my arms. "I think this is exactly where I should be." He glanced toward the records counter. "Please, let's go somewhere else." "No." People nearby began pretending not to listen. Dad lowered his voice. "I'll answer your questions. I promise." "When?" I asked. "After 33 years. He rubbed both hands across his face. "I made mistakes." "I know. But not for the reasons you're imagining." "Then explain." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Finally, he whispered, "I was trying to protect you." I almost laughed. "From what?" He didn't answer. Rachel spoke instead. "If you have information relevant to these records, now would be a good time." He looked at her with obvious frustration. "You don't understand." "No," Rachel replied calmly. "That's exactly why she's here." Dad turned back to me. "If you open those files, there's no going back. I've already crossed that line." He stared at me for several long seconds. Then his shoulders dropped. "I hoped." He stopped speaking again. "What?" "I hoped we'd never have this conversation." Before I could respond, the employee returned. "Ms. Webb, your request has been approved." My father closed his eyes. It was the first time I'd ever seen him look defeated. We followed the employee into a smaller records room. No dramatic music, no dusty boxes, just organized files and careful procedures. The employee placed a sealed folder on the table. "These are copies of the records you're authorized to receive." He explained each document before leaving us alone. I looked at Rachel. She nodded once. "Go slowly." I opened the folder. The first page looked familiar. Birth information, hospital, county, date, then the original certificate. Not the replacement I'd photographed. The original. Immediately I noticed differences. The formatting wasn't identical. Certain fields existed that weren't present on the later certificate. I kept reading. "Father Thomas Michael Webb." That didn't surprise me. Mother... I blinked. Read it again, then a third time. It didn't say Diane Elizabeth Webb. It said Emily Grace Parker. For several seconds, my brain refused to process the words. Rachel quietly reached over and turned the document slightly toward the light. "You saw it too," she said softly. I nodded. The sentence wouldn't come. I had imagined many possibilities. Not this. Dad had never denied being my father, because he was. But my mother, the woman who raised me, the woman who had just told me I wasn't her real daughter, she wasn't listed anywhere. I felt strangely calm, too calm, like my mind had separated itself from the rest of me. Rachel continued reviewing the documents. "There's more." Behind the certificate were several administrative pages, a filing notice, a later amendment, a request for a replacement certificate issued when I was 12. Rachel compared dates. "Interesting." "What?" "The replacement certificate wasn't created because someone made a spelling correction." She pointed to the filing notes. "It references supporting documentation submitted years after your birth." "What documentation?" "It doesn't say." Only a reference number. Nothing more. My father had remained silent throughout. Finally, I looked at him. Who is Emily Parker? His jaw tightened. He looked older than he had 2 hours earlier. Your mother. The words landed without emotion. Not because they didn't hurt. Because I had already seen them in writing. Documents remove the possibility of arguing. Paper doesn't flinch. Paper doesn't apologize. Paper simply exists. I asked the next logical question. Is she alive? Dad hesitated, long enough for Rachel and me to exchange a glance. Thomas. Rachel's voice remained professional. You need to answer. Yes. He barely whispered it. She's alive. My heart pounded. Where is she? He looked toward the window instead of me. I don't know. Rachel immediately noticed what I did. He hadn't answered the question. Not really. You don't know, she repeated slowly, or you don't want to tell her. He stayed silent. That silence answered everything. Rachel pulled another document from the folder. Her eyes narrowed. Freya. I leaned closer. What is it? She pointed to a handwritten notation near the bottom of one filing. It references a related family court matter. Below that, a case number, and attached to the reference, a forwarding address submitted years ago. The city caught my attention immediately. Cincinnati. Rachel looked at me, then at my father. You told her you didn't know. She turned the page over. This record says someone provided an updated address. Dad's face turned pale. He stopped. Again. Rachel quietly copied the case number onto her legal pad. This wasn't the end of the paperwork. It was the beginning. I stared at the name written across the top of the certificate one last time, Emily Grace Parker. For 33 years, I had believed there was only one woman who could answer the question of who I was. Now I knew there was another. And somewhere in Cincinnati, she might have spent just as many years wondering what had happened to me. I didn't call the number that afternoon. I didn't drive straight to Cincinnati. And I definitely didn't show up unannounced at the address attached to a decades-old court record. The emotional part of me wanted answers immediately. The accountant in me wanted to know whether the information was still accurate. Rachel agreed. If this address is 20 years old, knocking on that door could be pointless. So what do? We verify. That word had become the rhythm of my life. Verify, confirm, document, then decide. Over the next 3 days, Rachel used publicly available records while I searched everything I legally could. Property tax databases, voter registration records, professional licenses, nothing invasive, nothing illegal, just information anyone could obtain with enough patience. On Thursday evening, Rachel finally called. I found her. I sat upright so quickly my coffee spilled across my desk. You're sure? 99%. Where? She still lives outside Cincinnati. The house changed ownership 12 years ago. She refinanced 6 years later. The mailing address has stayed the same. I closed my eyes. She had been living less than 2 hours away. For decades. So, Rachel asked carefully, what do you want to do? I need to meet her. You understand she may not want that. I know. And she may not know anything. I know. And whatever happened 33 years ago, there's a good chance both sides remember it differently. I know. Rachel smiled softly. You keep saying you know. I don't think anyone actually knows until they're standing at the front door. She wasn't wrong. Saturday morning, we drove south together. The farther we left Columbus behind, the quieter I became. Rachel didn't force conversation. She understood silence could be productive. About 90 minutes later, GPS directed us into a quiet neighborhood filled with mature maple trees and modest brick homes. Nothing extravagant, nothing neglected, just peaceful. We parked across the street. I stared at the White House for nearly 5 minutes. Blue shutters, a small vegetable garden, wind chimes hanging near the porch, fresh flowers in 2 window boxes. Someone loved this place. Someone cared for it. Rachel glanced toward me. "You don't have to do this today." I swallowed. "Yes, I do." We walked slowly to the front door. Every step felt unreal. I rang the bell. Nothing happened. For a moment I wondered if no one was home. Then footsteps, slow, measured. The door opened. A woman with silver-streaked brown hair looked at us with polite confusion. She appeared to be in her mid-50s. Kind eyes, tired eyes. She wore gardening gloves and held a pair of pruning shears. "Can I help you?" My mouth suddenly felt dry. I couldn't finish. Rachel gently stepped beside me. "Are you Emily Parker?" The woman nodded cautiously. "Yes." Rachel looked at me. This was my moment. I forced the words out. "My name is Freya Webb." Everything changed. The pruning shears slipped from Emily's hand. They landed on the porch with a metallic clatter. She stared at me, not speaking, not blinking. Then she whispered something I barely heard. "No!" Her hand covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes almost instantly. "No!" She took one shaky step forward. "My God!" Her voice broke. "Freya?" I nodded, very slowly. She looked at my face as though trying to recognize someone she'd spent years imagining. Then she began crying, not dramatically, quietly, like someone whose heart had been carrying the same weight for decades. "I'm sorry," she kept repeating. "I'm so sorry." I frowned. "For what?" She shook her head over and over. I thought I'd never see you." Before I could respond, she stopped herself. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't assume anything." "You don't even know me." She stepped aside. Would you come inside?" The living room was warm and simple. Bookshelves, family photographs, a piano, no expensive furniture, no signs of extravagance, just a home. Emily returned with glasses of water because neither of us wanted coffee. No one seemed ready for something that ordinary. She sat across from me, hands trembling. "I've imagined this conversation more times than I can count." I looked directly at her. "I didn't know you existed until 3 days ago." She closed her eyes. "I figured." Silence settled between us. Finally, I asked the question that had followed me all week. "Did you give me up?" Emily looked genuinely confused. "What? Did you choose to let my father raise me?" Her expression changed immediately. "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I never gave you up." She leaned forward. "I was 23. Your father and I weren't married. When you were born," she paused, collecting herself. "3 weeks later, I was involved in a serious car accident." Rachel quietly took out a notepad but never interrupted. Emily continued. "I spent weeks in the hospital. My pelvis was fractured. I had internal injuries. I couldn't even walk." She looked at me. "Thomas said he'd care for you while I recovered." That sounded reasonable. I believed him. "So you agreed?" "I agreed temporarily." She emphasized the word. "Temporarily. I signed paperwork allowing him to make medical decisions while I was hospitalized. Nothing more." I felt my pulse quicken. "When did you realize something was wrong?" Emily laughed bitterly. "When I was finally discharged. I went to see you. He told me you'd moved. Then he stopped answering my calls." She stood and disappeared into another room. When she returned, she carried a faded storage box. She placed it gently on the coffee table. "I've kept this." She lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of neatly organized envelopes tied with ribbon, photographs, greeting cards, hospital documents, every item carefully labeled by year. She handed me the first bundle. "I wrote to you every birthday." I stared at the envelopes. Each one had been addressed to me. Each one had been returned, unopened. Across the front of several envelopes was the same postal stamp. "Return to sender. Address unknown." My throat tightened. Emily opened another folder. "There are more." Hospital records, physical therapy reports, insurance paperwork documenting months of rehabilitation. She showed me newspaper clippings about the highway accident. Everything matched the timeline. Nothing felt rehearsed. Nothing sounded exaggerated. Then she handed me a photo. A young woman holding a newborn baby. Her smile looked exhausted but genuine. The baby wore a tiny knitted hat. I recognized the blanket immediately. Not because I'd seen the picture before, because my father still kept that blanket in a cedar chest. All these years. Emily smiled through tears. "I knitted that while I was pregnant." I couldn't speak. She reached into the bottom of the box. "There was one more thing." It was a thick envelope from the county court. Never opened. The seal had already been broken years ago. Inside were copies of court filings, visitation requests, mediation notices, correspondence from attorneys. Rachel quietly reviewed the paperwork. Her expression grew increasingly serious. "Freya." I looked up. "These aren't adoption records." "I know. They're custody filings." Emily nodded. "I tried. For years. I kept filing requests. I kept asking for visitation." "What happened?" Emily's eyes filled again. "He always had another reason. Another delay. Another explanation. I eventually ran out of money." Rachel suddenly stopped turning pages. "Wait." She carefully separated one document from the stack. "This page numbering doesn't make sense." Emily looked confused. "What do you mean?" Rachel held up the packet. "Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Then it jumps to page 5. I leaned closer. "There's a missing page." Rachel nodded slowly. "Not just any page." She turned the documents over. "The court index says page 4 contained the judge's temporary order. The most important page in the entire file." Emily frowned. "I've never noticed that." Rachel looked at both of us. "If that order still exists in the court archives, it could explain exactly what Thomas was legally required to do." The room fell silent. Because for the first time, it seemed possible that the truth hadn't simply been hidden, it had been documented, and one missing page might finally reveal who had broken the promise that changed all 3 of our lives. The following Tuesday, Rachel and I were back in Columbus. This time we weren't looking for a birth certificate. We were looking for one missing page. It sounded almost ridiculous when I said it out loud. One page, 33 years of confusion, a lifetime of assumptions, a family built around a secret. And now, everything might come down to a single document that had somehow disappeared from an old court file. Rachel parked outside the Franklin County Courthouse and turned off the engine. "Before we go in," she said, "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If we find what we're looking for, let me do the talking." "I can talk." "I know. That's exactly why I'm asking." She wasn't worried I'd lose my temper. She was worried I'd ask emotional questions before understanding the legal context. I nodded. "Fine." The courthouse archives weren't open to the public in the way people imagine from television. We couldn't simply wander through rows of old files. Rachel had already filed the necessary requests based on the case number we found attached to my birth records. The archivist, an older man named Harold Benson, greeted us with practiced patience. "I've pulled everything that survived the digital conversion," he said. "Some files from the late 80s only exist on microfilm." Rachel smiled. "That's exactly what we were hoping." Harold led us into a quiet research room. A microfilm reader sat against one wall. He loaded the reel carefully. "Take your time. If you need certified copies, let me know." For nearly an hour, Rachel advanced frame after frame while I copied dates into my notebook. Petitions, scheduling orders, attorney correspondence, continuances, medical records. Nothing that answered the biggest question. Then Rachel stopped turning the reel. "There!" She pointed at the screen. "Case No. FC 89417. Temporary custody order. Page 4. I felt my pulse racing. Harold printed a certified copy for us. Rachel read it once. Then again. She looked at me without speaking. "What?" She handed me the paper. The order wasn't complicated. It was written in plain legal language. Following Emily Parker's temporary medical incapacity after a serious automobile accident, temporary physical custody of the minor child, Freya Ann Parker, would remain with Thomas Webb. Temporary. The word appeared several times. Then I reached the section that mattered most. Thomas Webb was ordered to maintain reasonable communication between the child and Emily Parker. Provide Emily Parker with updated residential information. Facilitate visitation upon medical clearance. Appear before the court for review within 6 months. I read the paragraph twice. 3 times. There was no ambiguity. No legal jargon hiding another meaning. The judge had expected me to go back and forth between my parents while Emily recovered. That review hearing never happened. Rachel looked toward Harold. "Can you see whether there's any record showing the review was completed?" Harold searched another database. After several minutes, he frowned. "That's odd." "What?" "The hearing was scheduled. But there's no disposition entered." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means the record ends. No order. No dismissal. No final judgment." Rachel folded her arms. "So legally speaking," Harold chose his words carefully, "I can't speculate, but the file appears incomplete." When we walked outside, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, I asked, "So Dad ignored a court order?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. "What I can say is this. The judge gave him obligations. We now have certified proof of those obligations. And everything Emily told us is consistent with this order." I looked back at the courthouse. "So he wasn't protecting me." Rachel sighed. "Not according to the evidence we've seen." For the first time since this investigation began, I felt anger replacing confusion. Not explosive anger. Something colder. More deliberate. Because this wasn't about a misunderstanding anymore. Someone had made choices. Repeatedly. Over years. Every birthday Emily missed. Every letter returned. Every conversation that never happened. Those weren't accidents. Someone had decided they should happen. My phone rang. Dad. I almost declined. Then I answered. "Hello." Silence. Finally he spoke. "I heard you went to court." I frowned. "How?" "I still know people." That wasn't an answer. "What do you want?" "I'd like to see you." "I'm busy." "I know what you found." Those words stopped me. You do. Yes. Then you know why I have questions. Another pause. "I'll answer them." "When?" "Tonight. At my office. No one else." Rachel shook her head before I even responded. I covered the phone. "He wants to meet alone." She mouthed one word. No, I agreed. If we're meeting, Rachel comes too. Dad sighed. I expected that. 7 o'clock. He hung up. Rachel looked thoughtful. Interesting. What? He didn't deny anything. No. He also didn't ask what documents we found. I realized she was right. Dad already knew exactly which page we had recovered, as if he'd always known it existed. At 7 that evening, we arrived at my parents' house. Mom wasn't there. Neither was Mason. Dad was waiting in his home office. The same office where I'd found the photocopy of my birth certificate. He looked exhausted, older, as though he'd aged years in 1 week. Before anyone sat down, he opened a locked drawer. Then he removed a thick manila folder. I suppose you've earned this? He slid it across the desk. I didn't touch it immediately. What is it? My copies. Copies of what? Everything. I opened the folder. Inside were neatly organized documents. Every letter Emily had mailed. Every envelope marked, returned to sender. Photographs, court notices, certified mail receipts, even handwritten notes in Dad's own handwriting. My stomach tightened. He had kept everything. Every single piece of it. Rachel carefully examined the stack. Then she froze. She picked up one particular document. A letter addressed to my father from Emily's attorney. The attorney had written, "Our client has been medically cleared and requests immediate visitation in accordance with the court's temporary order." The date was 32 years ago. Attached behind it was my father's handwritten response. It had never been mailed. Instead, someone had written across the bottom in blue ink, "Do not respond yet." No signature, no explanation, just 4 words. Rachel looked at Dad. "Who wrote this?" He stared at the paper. "For a long time." "I did." "You wrote, 'Do not respond yet.'" "Yes." "Why?" His voice cracked. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked. "That she'd take you." Rachel leaned forward. "The court order didn't authorize that." "I know. But I convinced myself it would happen anyway." He rubbed his forehead. "Every month I delayed. I told myself I just needed more time. Then another month passed. And another. Eventually, I couldn't admit what I'd done." I listened without interrupting. For years, I'd imagined some elaborate conspiracy. Instead, I was staring at something far more believable. One bad decision, followed by another, then another, until the truth became impossible to confess. Dad looked directly at me. "I told myself I was protecting you." "I wasn't. I was protecting myself." It was the first completely honest sentence I'd heard from him. Then he reached into the folder one final time. "There is something else." He placed a property deed on the desk. At first I didn't understand why. Then I saw the attached note. The document wasn't about real estate. It was simply holding another folded page underneath. Dad unfolded it slowly. I never showed Diane this. It was a letter, written in my mother's handwriting, dated almost 28 years earlier. Rachel read the first paragraph, then looked up at Dad. "When did Diane write this?" "A week after she learned the truth." "What truth?" I asked. Dad closed his eyes. "The truth that Emily was still trying to find you." He swallowed hard. "And that..." I had never told Diane the whole story. I didn't reach for Diane's letter immediately. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I was afraid of reading another document. Every piece of paper had rewritten part of my life. A birth certificate, a court order, returned birthday cards, an unanswered attorney's letter. Each one had taken someone I trusted and made them harder to recognize. Dad gently pushed the folded letter toward me. "You should read it." I unfolded the yellowed pages carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably Diane's. Neat, patient, almost elegant. The date at the top caught my attention. It had been written 28 years earlier. I would have been 5. The first paragraph was short. Thomas, I married you because I believed we were building a family together. Today I learned there is another woman who has spent years trying to see her daughter, and I learned you never told me the whole truth. I don't know whether I'm angrier that you lied to her or that you lied to me. I stopped. The room was silent except for the sound of the paper in my hands. I kept reading. I have loved Freya from the day you placed her in my arms. She has never been anything except my little girl, but every time I look at her now, I remember that our marriage began with a secret I didn't choose. A lump formed in my throat. Dad stared at the floor. Rachel didn't interrupt. The next paragraph was harder. If Emily truly wants to know her daughter, then she deserves honesty. If you continue hiding this from both of them, you aren't protecting anyone. You're simply asking me to carry a lie that belongs to you. I slowly lowered the letter. You knew. Dad nodded. She found out 5 years after we married. And you still kept lying? Yes. To both of you. Another nod. I looked back at the letter. There was more. Near the bottom, Diane had written something that made my chest tighten. I am trying to love Freya without letting my anger toward you become her burden. I don't know if I can keep separating the two forever. I closed my eyes. For years, I had believed Diane simply loved Mason more. Now I could see something more complicated. Not an excuse, not innocence. Just a woman who had been carrying resentment she never learned to put in the right place. Rachel finally spoke. This letter changes something important. I looked at her. It confirms Diane wasn't involved in the original deception. Dad answered before she could continue. She wasn't. I told myself I could fix everything before she ever needed to know. You never did, I said quietly. No. I made it worse. That much was undeniable. I folded the letter carefully. When did everything change? Dad looked confused. What do you mean? Diane loved me. She wrote that. So when did she stop acting like it? His face tightened. I don't think she ever stopped loving you. She started treating me differently. I know. When... He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and walked toward a tall bookshelf. From the highest shelf, he removed a worn leather journal. He held it for several seconds before placing it in front of me. Diane kept journals for years. I've never read them. She gave this to me yesterday. She said, his voice cracked. She wanted you to have it. I looked at the cover. I would have been 6. Did you read it? No. It's yours. Rachel looked at me. You don't have to read it now. I want to. I opened the journal. The early entries surprised me. They weren't bitter. They weren't angry. They were filled with ordinary moments. Freya lost her first tooth today. She insisted on wearing 2 different socks to kindergarten. Mason keeps teasing her, but she never cries. She hugged me tonight and said I make the best pancakes. Every page sounded like a mother writing about her daughter. Not a woman pretending, not obligation. Love. Real love. I turned another page. Another year. Another. Then something shifted. One entry was much shorter than the others. Thomas admitted he answered another letter from Emily months ago without telling me. The handwriting looked heavier, pressed harder into the paper. The following entries changed tone. I don't know what to believe anymore. Freya smiled at me today, and I felt guilty because all I could think about was his lies. She deserves better than this. Then, several months later, I caught myself being impatient with Freya today. She had done nothing wrong. I apologized after she went to bed because I couldn't bear letting her hear it. She'll never know. I swallowed hard. I didn't remember that day. She did. Another page. Thomas says we should never tell her. Maybe he's right. Maybe the truth would only hurt her. But hiding it is hurting me. Then another. Mason asked why Emily keeps sending letters. I lied to him. I stopped reading. I looked at Dad. Mason knew. Dad nodded slowly. Not everything, but enough to ask questions. Rachel leaned forward. How old was he? About 11. So he grew up knowing there was another woman connected to Freya. Dad nodded again. But I told him never to mention it. I continued reading. The entries became less frequent, more exhausted, less hopeful. Then I found the one that explained everything. It had been written almost 6 years ago. Today I looked at Freya and realized I've spent years punishing the wrong person. She isn't the reminder of Thomas's betrayal. Thomas is, yet somehow it's easier to distance myself from her than to admit my marriage survived on silence. I hate that I've become this version of myself. I read that paragraph twice, 3 times. No one spoke. Finally I whispered, She knew. Dad answered quietly, Yes. She knew she was hurting me. Yes. And she kept doing it. His eyes filled with tears. Yes. For the first time since this investigation began, I felt 2 emotions existing at once. Compassion and disappointment. I understood Diane's pain. I understood how betrayal could poison someone's judgment, but understanding wasn't the same as excusing it. She had choices. She kept making the wrong ones. I closed the journal. I want to talk to her. Dad looked surprised. Tonight, if she's willing. He nodded. I'll call. Less than 30 minutes later, Diane walked through the front door. She looked nothing like the woman who had shouted across the dinner table a week earlier. Her shoulders were slumped. Her eyes were swollen. She wasn't carrying anger anymore, only exhaustion. She saw the journal in my lap and immediately understood. You read it. I did. She sat across from me. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, she took a slow breath. I've rehearsed this conversation in my head for years. I always imagined I'd explain myself. She shook her head. Now I realize explanations aren't enough. I looked at her. Why did you say it? Her eyes immediately filled with tears. I wish I could tell you it was only because I was angry about Mason's business. It wasn't. She wiped at her face. For years. Every time I looked at you, I remembered the lie that destroyed my trust in your father. She closed her eyes, and instead of directing that hurt where it belonged, I slowly directed it toward the safest person in the room. The child? My child? The last 2 words came out as a whisper. I knew you hadn't done anything wrong. I knew that every single day. But resentment is strange. If you don't confront it, it finds someone weaker to land on. I listened without interrupting. I failed you, she continued. Not because you weren't my daughter. You were. You still are. I failed because I let my pain become your burden. Tears rolled down her face. And Sunday night, when you refused to save Mason again, I heard myself say the one sentence I knew would hurt you more than anything else. She covered her mouth. The second it left my lips, I wanted to take it back, but I couldn't. I looked at her for a long moment. I believe you're sorry. She nodded, crying openly now. But being sorry doesn't erase 33 years. No, it doesn't. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I don't know either. Those were the most honest words I could offer. She nodded slowly. I'll accept that. Jen, Dad's phone vibrated on the desk. He looked at the screen. His expression changed immediately. Rachel noticed. "What is it?" Dad swallowed. "It's Mason. He says he's on his way. He found out we've all been meeting." Dad looked at me, and he says, "There's something he's hidden from you for years." None of us said anything after Dad read Mason's message. The room felt strangely smaller, not because of the walls, because every conversation over the past week had peeled away another layer of my life. I wasn't sure how many layers were left. Dad set his phone on the coffee table. "He's 15 minutes away." Rachel looked at me. "We don't have to do this tonight." I shook my head. "If he knows something, I'd rather hear it now." Mom quietly stood. "I'll make coffee." It was such an ordinary sentence that it almost made me laugh. Coffee. As if we were expecting neighbors instead of another confession. 20 minutes later, Mason walked through the front door without knocking. He looked exhausted. His usually polished appearance was gone. Wrinkled button-down shirt, 3-day beard, dark circles under his eyes. He glanced around the room before settling on me. "So, I guess everybody knows." I didn't answer. Rachel broke the silence. "What do you want to tell Freya?" Mason let out a long breath. "Can I sit?" No one objected. He lowered himself into the armchair opposite me. For almost a full minute he stared at the floor. Then he finally looked up. "I've known you weren't Mom's biological daughter since I was 19. I felt surprisingly little shock. After everything else, this almost seemed inevitable. "What happened?" He rubbed his palms together. "I wasn't trying to spy. I swear. I came home from college one weekend. Dad wasn't here. Mom was cleaning the attic. She asked me to move some boxes." He looked toward Diane. "I found a folder." Mom nodded slowly. "I remember. It wasn't locked. I opened it. There were court papers. A birth certificate. Letters. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough. You asked Mom." "Yes." "What did she tell you?" Mason swallowed. "She cried. For almost an hour. Then she asked me never to tell you." I turned toward Diane. "You asked him to keep the secret." She nodded. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I convinced myself that if you never knew, you'd never have to feel what I felt." I stared at her. Instead, I spent my whole life wondering why I was never enough. She lowered her head. "I know." "No. You know now." Mason interrupted quietly. "I should have told you. Many times." "So why didn't you?" He laughed bitterly. "At first, I was 19. I believed Mom. I thought she was protecting you." He paused. "Later, I was protecting myself." Those words sounded painfully familiar. The same logic Dad had used. Different person. Same excuse. "What changed?" I asked. He looked embarrassed. "You did. I don't understand. You never stopped helping us." He looked around the room. "When my business struggled, you reviewed contracts. When I couldn't understand taxes, you spent weekends fixing my books. When the bank questioned my financial statements, you worked late without charging me." I remembered every one of those nights. I'd believed I was helping family. Mason continued. "And every single time, I knew I was accepting help from someone I wasn't being honest with." I frowned. "You could have told me." "I know. But then I'd lose everything." "There it is," Rachel said quietly. Mason looked toward her. "What?" "The real reason." He didn't argue, because she was right. He looked back at me. "I kept telling myself I'd explain later. When the business was stable. When Mom was happier. When Dad finally admitted the truth. There was always another excuse. I nodded slowly. Just like Dad. He closed his eyes. Yeah, just like Dad. The room fell silent again. Finally, I asked the question that had bothered me since Sunday night. When everyone wanted me to guarantee your loan, did you already know the company couldn't survive? His face changed immediately. He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any answer. Mason. He exhaled. Yes. You knew. Yes. I looked at him carefully. You weren't asking for temporary help. No. You were asking me to risk my financial future. Yes. So everyone at that dinner expected me to sign documents without knowing the full situation. He nodded once. No one defended him, not Dad, not Mom, not even himself. Rachel quietly asked, Freya, may I knew what she meant. She wanted to ask professional questions. Go ahead. Rachel opened the financial packet Mason had originally given me the night of the family dinner. I reviewed these statements after Sunday. Mason looked surprised. You did. Of course. She removed several pages. These projections. She tapped one table. Who prepared them? My controller. Rachel nodded. And did he know you were already behind on federal payroll tax deposits? Mason's eyes widened. How did you know that? I know how to read financial statements. She slid another page across the table. You classified overdue tax liabilities as short-term vendor obligations. I immediately leaned forward. She was right. I hadn't caught it Sunday because I only skimmed the packet before refusing. Now that I examined the details, the numbers didn't reconcile. Rachel continued. To someone without accounting experience, this would look like ordinary operating debt. But it isn't. She looked at me. Freya, if you had signed as guarantor, you could have become personally responsible after default depending on the loan structure. I looked at Mason. You knew I trusted financial documents. He nodded. You knew I'd probably review them. I hoped you wouldn't notice. The honesty almost hurt more than another lie. You wanted me to rely on incomplete information. I'm sorry. No. You were desperate. There's a difference. He didn't disagree. Dad suddenly stood. This ends now. He walked toward a cabinet and removed another folder. Unlike the old documents, this one was new. Inside were bank records, business statements, loan correspondence. He placed everything on the table. I've already spoken with the bank. Everyone looked at him. They asked whether I'd mortgage the house. I refused. Mason looked stunned. You what? I'm done asking other people to carry the consequences of your decisions. Dad's voice remained calm. I should have said that years ago. Mason looked as though he'd been slapped. You said family always helps family. I was wrong. No. Dad shook his head. I confused helping with rescuing. And every time I rescued you, I taught you someone else would absorb the cost. Mom quietly added, and we expected Freya to be that someone. No one denied it, because it was true. For the first time in my life, I watched my parents stop rewriting reality. They weren't minimizing, they weren't rationalizing, they were naming exactly what they'd done. It didn't erase anything, but it mattered. Mason leaned forward. So what happens now? Rachel answered before anyone else. That depends. On what? Whether you intend to deal honestly with your creditors. He frowned. I've never committed fraud. No, Rachel agreed, but your financial reporting raises serious concerns. She closed the folder. I'm not your attorney. But if I were, I'd advise complete transparency starting tonight. Mason rubbed his forehead. I don't even know where to begin. I surprised myself by answering, with the truth. He looked at me. I'm not fixing your books. I'm not guaranteeing your debt. I'm not calling your lenders. I'm not becoming your safety net. But, I paused. If you choose to tell the truth instead of hiding behind another excuse, I genuinely hope you rebuild your life. He blinked several times. That's it. That's all. Yes. You don't hate me. I thought about that carefully. No. I don't hate you. But I don't trust you. And those are two different things. His shoulders dropped. I think. That's fair. He stood slowly. I'll call the bank tomorrow. I'll tell them everything. No one applauded. No one celebrated, because accountability isn't dramatic. It's usually quiet. As Mason reached the front door, Dad spoke. One more thing. Mason turned. I've already contacted our estate attorney. Everyone looked at him. I'm updating my will. I'm also revising every beneficiary designation, every power of attorney, and every estate document. Mom stared at him. You already made the appointment. Yesterday. He looked directly at me. No more secrets. No more assumptions. No more rewarding dishonesty. Mason nodded once. I understand. After he left, the house felt strangely peaceful. Not healed, just honest, for the first time in decades. The next morning, Rachel called before I even arrived at work. The estate attorney returned my message. I picked up my notebook automatically. What did he say? He wants you present. Why? She paused. Because your father isn't just changing his will. He's planning to correct something that should have been corrected 33 years ago. 3 months later, my life looked almost nothing like it had before that Sunday dinner, not because everything had been fixed, because everything had finally become honest. Honesty, I learned, doesn't solve every problem. It simply makes it impossible to keep pretending there isn't one. Spring had settled over Columbus. The maple trees outside my office had turned green again, and tax season was finally winding down. For the first time in weeks, I could leave work before sunset. I had started sleeping through the night again. Not every night, but enough to notice the difference. Rachel and I still met for dinner every other Thursday. Emily and I spoke on the phone almost every evening, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for only 5 minutes. We weren't trying to make up for 33 years overnight. We were learning each other, slowly, naturally, one conversation at a time. She asked about my work. I asked about the garden behind her house. She told me she had always wondered whether I liked books because she had loved reading as a child. I laughed and admitted my apartment had more bookshelves than furniture. Neither of us called it fate. Sometimes children simply inherit ordinary things. One Saturday morning, she mailed me a small package. Inside was the tiny knitted baby blanket from the hospital photograph. She had repaired it several times over the years. There was a handwritten note tucked inside. I kept this because I never stopped believing I'd see you again. I folded the note carefully and placed it back inside the box. Some keepsakes don't belong on display. They belong somewhere safe. My relationship with Diane was very different. We hadn't spoken much. She respected that. She texted occasionally, never asking to meet, never asking for forgiveness. Usually it was something simple. I hope work isn't wearing you out. Or, I saw the tulips blooming today and remembered how much you loved planting them when you were little. She wasn't pretending nothing had happened. She also wasn't demanding access to my life. Oddly enough, that made it easier to read her messages. Boundaries had done something years of forced family dinners never could. They gave both of us room to breathe. Dad called more often than Mom. Not because we were close again, because he had accepted something important. Every conversation began the same way. Do you have time to talk? If I said no, He respected it. That had never happened before. People can change. Not quickly, not perfectly, but sometimes they do. Mason, meanwhile, was facing consequences that no one else could absorb for him. A month after our family meeting, his construction company officially entered Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings. To people unfamiliar with American bankruptcy law, that sounds like the end. It isn't always. Chapter 11 is a legal process that allows a business to reorganize its debts while attempting to continue operating. It isn't a free pass. The company must disclose its financial condition, honestly negotiate with creditors, and operate under court supervision. Whether it survives depends largely on whether the underlying business is actually viable. In Mason's case, it wasn't. His company's biggest problem had never been temporary cash flow. It was years of poor financial decisions. He had taken projects with almost no profit margin, ignored rising material costs, expanded too quickly, borrowed repeatedly to cover previous borrowing. The loan he wanted me to guarantee hadn't been a solution. It would have delayed the collapse. Nothing more. One afternoon he called. "I need to tell you something." "I'm listening." The bankruptcy trustee reviewed everything. I waited. "They said you were right." "I didn't say anything." "You did. You told me my problem wasn't one bad month. It was years of refusing to face reality." I remembered saying something similar. He sighed. "I hated hearing it." "I know. But you were right." There wasn't much else to say. I genuinely hoped he would rebuild his life. That didn't mean I had to rebuild his business. Those are different things. A week later, our extended family held my aunt's 70th birthday party. I almost didn't go. Rachel thought I should. Not because you owe anyone an explanation, but because you shouldn't disappear to make other people comfortable. She had a point. The party was held at my Aunt Linda's farmhouse outside Columbus. For the first hour, everything remained pleasantly ordinary. Children ran through the yard. People argued over barbecue recipes. Someone brought an old photo album. Then inevitably, my cousin Daniel approached me. "I heard you refused to help Mason." His tone wasn't hostile, just curious. "I refused to guarantee a loan." "Same thing, isn't it?" "No," I smiled politely. "It's very different." Before I could explain further, another relative joined us, then another. Within minutes, a small circle had formed. The rumors had clearly spread. Some believed I'd abandoned my family. Others believed Mason had stolen money. A few apparently thought Dad had secretly disinherited everyone. No one actually knew the truth. I took a slow breath. I won't discuss private family matters. That should have ended it. Instead, one uncle frowned. "Family is supposed to protect family." Before I could answer, another voice spoke behind us. "No." Everyone turned. Dad. He had arrived only moments earlier. He walked calmly into the circle. "Family is supposed to tell each other the truth." The yard became silent. He looked directly at my uncle. "For years, I expected Freya to solve problems she didn't create. I was wrong." No one interrupted. He continued. "Mason's company failed because of Mason's business decisions, not because Freya refused to risk her future." He looked toward me briefly before addressing everyone again. "If anyone wants someone to blame, blame me. I created this family culture. I confused loyalty with silence, and I won't do that anymore." I hadn't expected him to say any of that. Neither had anyone else. The conversation ended almost immediately, not because everyone agreed, because there wasn't much left to argue with. The truth has a way of making gossip less interesting. Later that evening, I found Dad standing alone near the back porch. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said quietly. "I did. He looked older than I remembered. I spent too many years letting people believe whatever protected me. I'm finished doing that. For the first time in months, I believed him. Not because he said the right words, because he had said them publicly, without gaining anything. That mattered. The following Monday, Rachel called while I was reviewing audit work papers. I just heard from the estate attorney. I leaned back in my chair. Everything finalized. Almost. What does almost mean? It means your father signed the new will. I waited. But that's not why he asked me to call. What happened? Rachel's voice became thoughtful. There's another document. What kind of document? A sworn written statement. About what? Everything. The birth records. The custody order. The letters. His decisions. Why write that now? Because he said one day someone might question how all this happened. She paused. And he wanted the truth preserved in his own words before anyone else had to tell it. I stared out my office window. 33 years of silence. Now a written confession, not for a courtroom, not for money, not even for forgiveness. Simply because the truth deserved a permanent place in the record. 6 months after the dinner that changed everything, I found myself sitting in the same law office where this story had quietly begun to move toward its ending, not because someone had died, not because another lawsuit had been filed. This meeting was about something much less dramatic and much more important. Responsibility. The conference room was bright-lined with bookshelves and framed legal certificates. Rachel sat beside me, though. Today, she wasn't acting as my attorney. She was there because my father had specifically asked if she would attend as a neutral witness. Emily sat across from me for the first time since our initial meeting without looking nervous. She smiled when our eyes met. It wasn't the smile of someone trying to replace lost years. It was simply the smile of a mother who no longer had to hide. A few minutes later, Thomas and Diane walked in together. They weren't holding hands. I noticed that immediately. There had once been a time when they performed the image of a perfect marriage in public. That performance was over. Whatever remained between them now looked quieter, more honest. The estate attorney, Michael Donovan, entered carrying 2 thick binders. He greeted everyone politely before sitting down. Thank you all for coming. I know this hasn't been an easy year. Nobody argued. He opened the first binder. Mr. Webb has updated every estate planning document under my supervision. He looked toward me. Freya, your father asked that nothing be hidden from you. I nodded. That's what I want, Michael continued. The previous estate plan heavily favored Mason. I already knew that. Dad had admitted as much. The revised documents divide assets according to clearly stated intentions and legal ownership. He paused. More importantly, they remove every condition that previously tied financial assistance to family obligations. I frowned. What does that mean? He smiled gently. It means no beneficiary is expected to care for another adult family member in exchange for receiving an inheritance. I looked at my father. You actually removed that, he nodded. I should never have expected you to become responsible for Mason. Michael continued. There are also revised powers of attorney, medical directives, trust instructions, and written explanations attached to each change. Rachel leaned toward me. That's unusual, so people don't challenge them later. Exactly. The attorney removed another document. This is the written statement your father prepared. Dad looked at him. You can summarize it. Michael nodded. For nearly 40 pages, Mr. Webb explains the circumstances surrounding Freya's birth. Emily Parker's accident, the temporary custody order, his failure to comply with that order, and the consequences that followed. No one spoke. There are no excuses. There are explanations. But responsibility is accepted entirely by Mr. Webb. I watched my father carefully. Months ago, he would have defended every decision. Today, he simply listened. Michael closed the folder. He also asked me to preserve this statement with his estate records. Why? I asked. Dad answered himself. Because I don't ever want anyone rewriting this story after I'm gone. The simplicity of that answer surprised me. He wasn't trying to improve his legacy. He was trying to protect the truth. Michael turned another page. There is one more matter. He looked directly at me. Freya, your father designated you as co-executor. I blinked. No. The word came out before I even thought about it. Everyone looked at me. Michael remained calm. Would you like to explain your decision? Yes. I folded my hands together. I appreciate the trust. I really do. But I won't spend another part of my life managing this family's conflicts. I looked toward Dad. You've spent months taking responsibility. I'm grateful. But if I accept this role, I'll become responsible for solving problems after you're gone. I shook my head gently. I don't want that. Dad didn't look offended. Instead, he nodded. I expected you might say that. You did. Yes. I almost didn't include your name. Then why did you? He smiled sadly. Because for the first time, I wanted you to have the freedom to choose. That answer stayed with me. For years, choices had been made for me. Where I belonged, what I deserved, what I should sacrifice. This time, the choice was mine. Michael made a note. We'll appoint an independent professional fiduciary instead. Rachel smiled slightly. That's probably the healthiest decision. I agreed. The meeting could have ended there, Sarah. Instead, Diane reached into her purse. I brought something. She handed me a cream-colored envelope. I know you already read my journal. This is different. I looked down at it. There was no pressure in her eyes. No expectation. Only hope. What is it? A letter. I wrote it after our last conversation. I wasn't sure whether to mail it, so I brought it instead. I opened the envelope. The letter wasn't long. There were no dramatic apologies, no attempts to justify the past, only clear sentences. Freya. I spent years confusing shame with silence. I believed that if I never spoke about my failures, they would somehow become smaller. Instead, they grew. I cannot ask you to trust me again. Trust belongs to the person who was hurt, not the person who caused the hurt. Whether our relationship ever grows again will be entirely your decision. Thank you for teaching me that forgiveness and access are not the same thing. I finished reading, then carefully folded the letter again. I appreciate this. She nodded. I didn't write it expecting an answer. I know. For several moments, no one spoke. Finally, Emily broke the silence. I'd like to say something. Everyone turned toward her. She looked first at Diane. I've spent years imagining I'd hate you. Diane lowered her eyes. Emily continued. But after learning the truth, I realized something. You weren't the person who took my daughter away. You were another person who was damaged by the same lie. Tears filled Diane's eyes immediately. I'm still responsible for how I treated Freya. Yes. Emily nodded gently. You are. But responsibility doesn't erase humanity. No one could have planned a better sentence, because it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about accuracy. People can hurt each other without becoming monsters. People can love someone and still fail them. Those truths can exist together. When the meeting finally ended, everyone walked toward the parking lot. Dad stopped beside me. I have one last question. What is it? He hesitated. If someday, years from now, you decide you want dinner with your mother. I hope you'll tell her. I smiled faintly. If that day comes, I'll be the one making the invitation. He nodded. I think she'd like that. As I drove home, my phone rang. It was Emily. I forgot to tell you something. What? She laughed softly. I found another box in the attic. What kind of box? The one I packed before the accident. There's something inside addressed to you. I smiled. More letters. No. Her voice grew quiet. It's the first gift I ever bought for my daughter. A week after the meetings with the estate attorney, I drove back to Cincinnati. This time I wasn't chasing evidence. I wasn't searching court records. I wasn't carrying copies of birth certificates or legal files. For the first time since that Sunday dinner, I was simply going to see my mother. Emily greeted me at the front door wearing gardening gloves again. We both laughed. I really should stop catching you while you're working outside. She smiled. I've been hoping you'd say that instead of apologizing. That simple exchange felt strangely comforting. There was no pressure to reclaim lost years, no expectation that either of us would suddenly know how to be mother and daughter. We were just two adults learning each other. She led me upstairs. The box is in here. It sat on the top shelf of a hallway closet. Plain cardboard, faded packing tape. The words, baby things, were written across the side in black marker. Emily carefully lifted it onto the dining room table. I packed this before the accident. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. When she opened the lid, I saw tiny clothes folded with impossible care. A pair of infant shoes, a knitted hat, hospital bracelets, a baby book with only the first few pages completed. Near the bottom was a small wrapped package. The wrapping paper had yellowed with age. A tag remained attached. For Freya. Emily touched it gently. I bought it 2 days before the accident. I never got the chance to give it to you. She handed it to me. You should open it now. Inside was a small silver compass, not expensive, not engraved, just a simple pocket compass. I looked at her confused. She smiled through tears. My father gave me one when I graduated from high school. He always said, "You won't always know where you're going, but you'll always know how to find your direction if you stop pretending you're lost." She laughed softly. I thought I'd pass that to my daughter someday. I held the compass in my hand. 33 years late. Still meaningful. I love it. Her smile widened. I'm glad. We spent the afternoon looking through old photographs. Not every picture included me. Some showed Emily before I was born. College friends, camping trips, family holidays. For the first time, I saw the woman behind the missing years. Not just the mother I'd never known, a whole person. That mattered. Because parents don't become real only after we understand them. They were always real. We simply don't always know their stories. When I returned to Columbus that evening, my apartment felt different. The compass sat on my kitchen counter, not as proof of what had been taken, as proof that life could still move forward. Over the next several months, my routine settled into something peaceful. Work remained busy. Rachel and I still met for dinner every few weeks. Emily visited Columbus once a month. Sometimes we went to museums. Sometimes we cooked together. Sometimes we did absolutely nothing except sit on the porch with coffee. Those quiet afternoons became some of my favorite memories. My relationship with Diane remained respectful. She never appeared unexpectedly. She never demanded holidays together. She never used guilt. Every few weeks she sent a card, sometimes a recipe, sometimes a newspaper clipping she thought I'd enjoy. Once, she mailed me a packet of old childhood drawings she had carefully saved. Inside was a note. These belong to you. I should never have believed memories could replace honesty. I thanked her. Nothing more. That was enough. Boundaries aren't punishments. They're instructions. They tell people how they may participate in your life. Some relationships grow inside those boundaries. Others don't. Either outcome is acceptable. Thomas changed more than anyone. He volunteered with a legal aid organization that helped low-income parents understand custody procedures. When he told me I asked why, he answered quietly, because if someone had explained the law to the younger version of me, I might have been forced to face the truth much sooner. Maybe, maybe not, but I respected that he had chosen to spend his time preventing someone else from repeating his mistakes instead of trying to erase his own. Mason eventually closed his construction company for good. He accepted a project management position with another contractor. A year earlier, he would have considered that a failure. Now he described it differently. It's the first job I've ever had where I don't spend every day pretending everything is fine. I believed him, not because he asked me to, because his actions matched his words. One Sunday afternoon, almost exactly a year after everything began, I received an unexpected invitation. Dad was hosting a small family lunch. No celebration, no speeches, just lunch. At the bottom of the message, he had written something that caught my attention. No expectations. If you don't come, I'll understand. That sentence told me more than the invitation itself. I decided to go, not because everything had been repaired, because I finally trusted that leaving was always an option. When I arrived, nothing dramatic happened. There were hamburgers on the grill, children running through the backyard, my aunt arguing with my uncle over potato salad. Normal life. Diane walked over slowly. Hi. Hi. I'm glad you came. I am too. She didn't hug me. She waited. I stepped forward first. The hug lasted only a few seconds. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a return to the past. It was simply two people acknowledging that healing sometimes begins with small moments instead of grand gestures. Later that afternoon, Emily arrived. Dad had invited her. I hadn't known. For a brief second, I wondered if this would become another disaster. Instead, Diane walked toward Emily. Neither woman spoke immediately. Then Diane extended her hand. Thank you for coming. Emily accepted it. Thank you for inviting me. No one pretended 33 years hadn't happened. No one tried to become friends overnight. They simply treated each other with dignity. Sometimes that's the most realistic, happy ending life offers. As the sun began to set, I stood alone near the fence, turning the little silver compass over in my hand. A year earlier, I thought one sentence had destroyed my identity. You're not my real daughter. Now I understood something completely different. A birth certificate had revealed the truth about my beginnings. Court records had exposed decades of deception. Letters had documented love that never disappeared. Journals had recorded pain that was never properly confronted. But none of those documents decided who I would become. They explained my history. They didn't define my future. The family I was born into shaped me. The family that raised me changed me. The family I chose to keep in my life would always be my decision. That more than any legal document became the greatest truth I discovered. Growing up in a complicated family can leave invisible scars that don't disappear simply because the truth finally comes out. Sometimes the deepest wound isn't the lie itself. It's realizing how long you lived without having the chance to make informed choices about your own life. Healing begins when we stop confusing boundaries with revenge. Protecting yourself doesn't mean you hate the people who hurt you. It means you've learned that love without honesty eventually becomes another form of harm. If you've ever been manipulated by guilt, pressured to sacrifice your future for someone else's decisions, or discovered painful family secrets later in life, I hope Freya's journey reminds you that truth and compassion can exist together. You can acknowledge another person's pain without accepting responsibility for the choices they made. Forgiveness, when it comes, is deeply personal, but forgiveness never requires restoring unlimited access to your life. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to establish healthy boundaries with someone you still cared about? Feel free to share your experience in the comments. Your story might encourage someone else who needs to hear they're not alone. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about family resilience, justice, and healing, consider subscribing for more journeys like this. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.